Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. And this morning, I'm really pleased to have with me as my guest Neeta Sahadev, who's a partner at White & Case. Neeta, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Richard. Happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the reason I invited you is because you have one of the more unusual backgrounds, degrees I have seen. I've interviewed a lot of lawyers, but I see you have a background in criminology. Tell me a little bit about what motivated you to do that degree and what were you thinking you were going to do with that degree?
It's not going to be a very exciting story, but of course I'll share that with you. So I grew up in Toronto, Canada, and at least when I was going to school, there was no concept of pre-law there. And I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a lawyer.
Uh,
And
uh,
so when it came time to deciding what to do in undergrad, law school was always the goal for me. And I wanted to do something that's sort of tied to law. At that time, I thought I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. And so criminology was sort of the closest to pre-law over
uh.
there, some sort of tie to criminal law that I thought I would practice. And so that's why I did criminology. And then I thought if I don't get into law school, I'm going to go become an investment banker similar to my dad. And so I did the economics degree as a backup. But long story short, got into law school, didn't become a criminal lawyer, and so didn't put that criminology degree into.
Well, let me ask you, since we're talking about that topic and I never see it, what do you study when you're a criminologist? I'm so curious. Like, what kind of classes did you take? I mean, you still got a degree in it. What did you do?
Yeah, it's a lot. So it's been many years. So let me try to think back as to what the courses were. But there were many interesting courses that talk about, like, gender and the criminal system, and how, for example, women are treated in the criminal system, and the
Mhm.
type of sentencings that they get, and how they're treated in judicial trials. There was a lot of courses on race in the criminal justice system as well, right? Like how the race sort of impacts the type of crimes that one is convicted for, the sentencing, a lot of about different types of sentencing options, reformation, trying to explore different types of sentencing styles and options. So there was a variety of things, and a lot of people, I would say, who do that degree sort of go into academics or policy. There were definitely some colleagues of mine that went to law school, but it was definitely very interesting, very different from my economics degree.
Yeah, I'll
A
bet.
lot of very interesting topics that you sort of get to deal with, and if you like research and writing, it's a great degree that you get to explore further in.
Well, it sounds like it was actually pretty good preparation for law school because it sounds like it was like actually the perfect, I mean, it sounds like sort of the perfect degree as it turns out.
Yeah, definitely a perfect degree in the sense of you get a lot of practice in terms of critical thinking, research, writing. I'm one of those people who actually think that law school doesn't prepare you for law firm life and being a lawyer. And so yeah, certainly it did help me in law school, but not in preparation of becoming an M&A lawyer, for example.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you mentioned that you kind of knew you wanted to be a lawyer from early on. What drove that inspiration?
So several things. One of it is the stereotypical thing I'm sure you've heard a lot of. When you're a child and you're argumentative and you have a lot of strong opinions, your family keeps telling you you'll make a great lawyer, and that was certainly the case for me. I came with a very opinionated mind from a very young age. Had very strong opinions. Used to get into a lot of arguments with my parents with my views, and they'd be like, "You're going to make a great lawyer someday." My whole family, my extended family, is consists of a lot of engineers, and so right from the bat I was like, I do not want to be an engineer. I want to do something different. There weren't really any lawyers in my family. Like, I had two uncles who were practicing lawyers in India, but very different, obviously, from, like, being a lawyer in North America and Canada, the US. And so I was intrigued in that. And then as a child growing up, I read a lot of John Grisham novels, and I was a huge fan of Ally McBeal, the show. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I was like, this seems great. Like, they try different types of cases in during the day, and they go out drinking at night. Like, what could be. And so it was all these naive thoughts that made me think that I would go into law school. I had a law course in high school. I loved my teacher. I just found it interesting, and I was like, okay, I think I could do this. I don't think any of that sort of gave me a real perspective about what being a lawyer would be like.
Yeah.
That comes from sort of being in law school and working at a law firm, but those were sort of the driving things that initially pushed me to that. And obviously then the interest changed and you get more serious and you learn more about the career and profession, and that sort of then forms your decisions.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. So when you finally got to law school, did you have an idea of what kind of, at that point, did you have an idea of what kind of lawyer you were gonna be, or when did you kind of figure that out?
Yeah, so I thought I would be a criminal lawyer, hence a criminology
Yeah.
degree. Plus, everything on social media at that point was all sort of focused on being a litigator, a lot of criminal law and things like that. So I thought I would be a criminal lawyer, much to my mom's dismay, who thought I would be killed by the criminals and things like that. But once I started law school, that was sort of my first sort of exposure for into the different types of law that was there, right? Like social media presents a very, I think at least at that time, it was very much focused on being a litigator, right? Like you go to court, and I didn't realize at that point naively that there are different types of lawyers that you could be. And so your initial couple of courses that you take in law school, your constitution, your real estate, your business corporations, your torts and all of that sort of exposed me to the different areas of law that were there. And I took an interest, just with my economics degree, like the business courses made more sense to me. I could see sort of more of a natural match there. And then, so in Canada, at least in Toronto, you go through this whole summer recruiting process similar to the OCIs that you do here, but it's with the hope of getting a 2L position that then leads to an articling position. So in Toronto, you have to do a 10-month articling internship before you're actually admitted to the bar. So it happens after your 3L. And so the typical OCIs are always focused on, IP, litigation, and corporate. And so from my first year itself, I knew that I didn't enjoy the moots and trial. IP didn't make sense to me. I didn't have an engineering background, or it wasn't something that necessarily excited me. And so corporate sort of seemed like the natural fit. And I went through the OCI process and got a summer position at a large international law firm in Toronto, and got into their corporate group there. And then I think that was so once I started working there was sort of when I got my first real exposure to what does corporate law even mean, right? Like you hear corporate law, but you don't realize, for example, real estate, tax, environmental, public M&A, private M&A, cap markets, securities, all of that falls under that. And so only when I first started working at the law firm was when I realized there's a whole gamut of options there. And now I need to figure out what within there makes sense to me. So when I started working, I just happened to have an office next to the energy group at our law firm there. And I naturally just started getting to know the partners and associates there and getting work there. And as a result of that, for the first 1 or 2 years of my career, I did a lot of energy law. Then I started meeting more people within the corporate group and some of the private M&A attorneys, and that made that was a nice fit for me. I really enjoyed working with them. I enjoyed the client work, and so that's when I started slowly shifting my focus more to private M&A. And so that was my first couple of years. I moved to the Silicon Valley when I can't remember, I think it was a 4th or 5th year associate at that point. I moved for personal reasons and joined White & Case at that point. And, we do a lot of, at White & Case, we do a lot of strategic private M&A. I'm in Silicon Valley, so we do a lot of technology M&A. And so then that's how my career sort of pivoted more into doing strategic private M&A with a special focus on technology M&A. So I think it was a lot of chances and just being at the right place at the right time and being influenced by the people that you meet and the work that comes to you.
Yeah. Well, since you're the first guest I've had that actually, I think the first guest that's gone to Canadian law school, do you know how Canadian law school is different from the US, or do you happen to even know that?
In some ways. So, we definitely have a lot of less law schools in Canada. So generally, if you've gone to law school in Canada, you've gone to a good law school. Whereas in the US, you've got hundreds and thousands of law schools. So we don't necessarily have those ABA rankings like you have here.
Right.
I think the courses are pretty much similar in the sense your first year is all your compulsory courses, and then your second and third year you get to do your electives, and you can do like an IP focus stream or a business focus stream. So I think in that sense it's similar. From what I can tell, more recently, you've got a lot of business clinics, whether that's in the US law schools or in Canadian law schools, that I think sort of prepare you much more for going into law firm life. But yeah, I think the similarities are definitely there. You do A lot of US law firms recruit from Canada quite heavily, and I think it's because of the similarities in the training and the teaching for sure.
Makes sense. Now, I know you've only been at one US firm and one Canadian firm, but how do you kind of compare law school or law firm practice? Would you say culturally? Can you any particular notable differences, or does it feel like it's pretty much the same whether you're in Canada or Silicon Valley?
I'm biased towards Canada, so I'm going to say the Canadians are nicer. I'm sure that's not a popular opinion. But I mean, other than that, I think it's very similar. We practice the same types of law, you know, like your deal types are very similar. I would say, you know, obviously US being a bigger market, I think you see the market trends first in the US and then Canada tends to follow a couple of months later. But other than that, I mean, I think for me, the one stark difference is when I was working in Toronto, I was at the largest office at that firm. And so it's much more bigger than the current office that I'm at. I'm in the Silicon Valley office of White & Case. And so there's those differences of being in a larger office versus a smaller office. Quite frankly, I appreciate and enjoy being in a smaller office more because I think you
Yeah.
know the people around you much closer, and there's a lot more collegiality amongst the whole office, whereas when you're in a large office you just get to know the people that you work with. There's no way that you can know all 500 people in your office, but other than that, like, it's very similar, you know. It's great deals, great clients, everyone takes the work very seriously. The culture, there's, you know, cultural differences between being East Coast versus West Coast. East Coast, so the way you dress is very differently, for example, right? Whereas the West Coast is a lot more relaxed, but in terms of work, I think it's very similar.
Now, is your move to Silicon Valley permanent, or will you move back to Canada one day, or what are your long-term
I
plans, or
know
do
it's
you
a
know?
constant debate amongst my husband and I. He was not a fan of the winter or the cold, so I can't convince him yet. But you know, I keep telling him that I'd love to retire in Canada.
Uh-huh.
20, 30 years down the line, whenever that happens for us. My family is still there, my friends are there, and so that will always be home for me. But you know, um, being a diehard fan of Canada, I never really wanted to move to the US. I've moved for personal reasons, but I'm very happy that I'm in California of all the different states. It's been great for me so far. The weather, the wine, the work for sure. The firm's been great. So I think California is home for now.
Well, Nita, I really appreciate your taking the time and sharing your story. Like I said, you had one of the more unusual backgrounds that I've come across, and I really appreciate your telling me about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me and have a great day.
This is Richard Hsu and Neeta Sahadev. Thanks.